For centuries, the content of Shakespeare's plays has been reinterpreted and integrated into works by other artists across all media. Entire plots, or simply titles and characters, have been utilized to draw thematic connections or to invoke Shakespearean images. However, it is unusual that an artist does so while also being considered their home country's equivalent to Shakespeare. Gord Downie, the lead vocalist and lyricist for the band The Tragically Hip, has been titled Canada's Shakespeare, Canada's unofficial poet laureate, and, jokingly, the Mayor of Canada, for his reflection of the nation in his writing. Yet Downie does not write of the country out of patriotism. He and his band's nationalistic popularity is a result of their fans' perspectives on their oeuvre. The band's reputation additionally connects them to Shakespeare, as similar cultural movements complicate his legacy as well. The use of Shakespeare in Gord Downie's lyrics unintentionally aligns him with Canadian and historical English nationalist movements, highlighting similarities in his and Shakespeare's perceptions of human nature when facing patriotism, and in the theoretical concepts between both writers and countries. The name Shakespeare not only indicates a mastery of language and an understanding of the human condition, but also a typification of a nation's identity. In the late 18th century, England was inundated with French culture, including the work of philosopher Voltaire. Voltaire had a well-known disdain for the baseness of Shakespeare's works, despite adapting their plots into his own plays and translating several of them into French. In this era, Shakespeare was viewed as quintessentially English, but the nation did not yet produce the feverish bardolatry that came to define projects like David Garrick's Jubilee or the Boydell Shakespeare Gallery. The younger generation, who had never known peace with France, saw Shakespeare's baseness as identifiably English, and began promoting him as a way to rid England of the influence of other countries. According to Paul Innes, using a theoretical framework devised by André Lefebvre, a concept of a national poet symbolizing a country arises due to a particular artist's work conforming to nearly intangible cultural elements that appear to predate the formation of a particular language or nation. In England's case, Shakespeare was chosen essentially by default, as other poets like Edmund Spenser and John Milton were too concerned with ideologies which hindered any populist sentiments in their works, Spenser's supposedly being the multiplicity of poetry, and Milton's being mere heretical religious views. Shakespeare also defied the alleged basis in antique epics nationalist writings should contain. Renaissance England's focus on Aristotle's theories, which somewhat debased these antique epics, meant that the country could easily embrace a theatrical tragedian, as drama was seen by Aristotle to more expertly deliver an emotional arc than epics. As Gord Downie states in Cordelia, "Old antiques a man alone can entertain. Ancient culture does not apply to the entirety of England. Only a man alone can glean meaning from it." Canadian nationalism and culture closely mirror the same qualities of England. Both 18th century England and contemporary Canada are cultures of negation, defined by what they are not. There is such a large amount of media from more influential nations, America in Canada's case, and France and England's, that when a new generation is seeking its own identity, it clings to what little its country has developed. As University of Ottawa Vice Dean Catherine Prince states, as nationalism gained both force and adherence, the distaste for Italian villainy, French vanity, and aristocratic vice that permeates Shakespeare's plays resonated among a public reacting with disgust to a surfeit of the once fashionable continental delights. Similar can be said for Canada's reaction towards American culture. Like Shakespeare in England, the Tragically Hip were chosen by default as well. No other Canadian band were perceived to reflect Canada back onto itself as skillfully, and their minimal breakthrough in the American market let them be embraced by their home country in a way that was unprecedented with Canadian expats like Neil Young and the band. Young, not living in Canada for nearly 50 years, and the band romanticizing the American South to the point that they have been called Canada's CCR. The Tragically Hip are Canada's band because they are acclaimed more strongly by Canadians than any other group. University of British Columbia professor emeritus Alan Smith details how the influx of American media in Canada suggests an identity. However, it is mainly vague similarities between disparate parts of the country. Shakespeare, with his essential Englishness, could also succumb to this pattern and reinforce previously existing prejudices within the United Kingdom. He could be thought of as culturally verboten in Scotland, Wales, or Ireland, regardless of his popularity in those genres or the country's presence in his own plays. Geddy Lee of Rush illustrates a similar concept that Downie's lyrics are uniquely Ontarian. They may reference locations throughout Canada, but their perspective is one from Ontario. Their music correlates most exclusively to their home province. The content may not be as easily consumed in Quebec or other provinces. The inflation of the center of the universe, Toronto, and by extension southern Ontario, that supposedly reflects the entirety of Canada, and self-aggrandizing English identity contribute to the popularity of each country's national poet as much as individual talent. It is ironic, however, that the Tragically Hip became Canada's band, as they used materials thought to be non-populist. In the 1980s, they established themselves as a blues rock bar band over the more popular new wave genre. Downie also approaches his songwriting as poetry and inserts references to Shakespeare, two pieces of media stereotypically feared in English classes for their perceived difficulty and intellectual reputations. The popular conception that Shakespeare and poetry are only for the elite, for a man alone, is incorrect. While Shakespeare's sonnets and narrative poems are written for an educated audience and dedicated to the aristocracy, his plays were directed towards a general audience. Otherwise, how would his theater generate money? Elizabethan plays needed to be entertaining, especially when one could watch a bear fight off a pack of dogs right across the street for practically the same entry fee. Shakespeare's legacy as England's national poet was created because of literature's increasing availability to lower classes in the late 18th century. Shakespeare was typically considered appealing to all of England throughout history, but not until the Industrial Revolution did increased literacy mean his works finally reached their pinnacle as cultural benchmarks. To declare that Shakespeare does not belong in popular culture is to deny his influence, and negate his legacy as the greatest writer in the English language, regardless if this acclaim is overzealous. Although beginning their careers in an unpopular genre with lyrics reminiscent of stereotypically avoided writing forms, the Tragically Hip are still possessed by Canada. It is the skilled use of supposedly anti-populist elements that counterintuitively position both Shakespeare and the Tragically Hip as patriotic symbols of their respective countries. Shakespeare's more artful detailing of England's history as compared to his aforementioned contemporaries transcends this alleged elite status, as does the Tragically Hip's writing. Stompin' Tom Connor's 1973 The Hockey Song is a beloved tune about Canada's national winter sport, but it takes the sport as face value and does not necessarily explore the deeper cultural roots that make hockey the good old hockey game. The Tragically Hip's closest analogs to the song are 1998's Fireworks and 2006's The Lonely End of the Rink. The songs mention the 1972 Summit Series and Bobby Orr, and Downie's perspective of playing as a goalie, respectively, but are personal and therefore more readily identifiable to the listener, first-person narratives of relationships with the game and significant others. By utilizing more intimate and abstract, and poetic writing about hockey, poetry is able to be placed at the same cultural and populist level as the sport and express a wider array of emotion and experience than those of the elite. The works of both the Tragically Hip and Shakespeare eclipse their supposed stereotypes. The popular conception of the Tragically Hip as nationalist icons has led to the band to be perceived as only jingoistic symbols of Canada, containing little depth. The band, however, do not see themselves as the exemplifying icons of Canada's culture. Gord Downie's lyrics may inadvertently celebrate what makes Canada Canada, but he suggests Canada the nation is separate from Canada the idea. In a Canada Day show in 1992, Downie told the crowd that the holiday is a tool of oppression the man uses to keep us down, and later stated, "I believe everything would have been way better if we'd done the whole thing, the concert, on July 2nd, we could have celebrated the Canada of the South and not the Canada that is sold to us. Nationalism in any form is not a natural attitude. An outside cause, be it society or the man, has created the idea of a nation to distract from what the nation truly is. In a 1998 concert, Downie declared,
"Come on, folks, this isn't supposed to mirror society. It's supposed to provide an ideal."
Although there are references to political issues and real-life events in Downie's lyrics, the experience of a concert is not itself reality. It is what reality should be. We do not know Shakespeare's perspectives on his chosen art form, but the closest one has is the content of his plays referencing the characteristics of theater, whether they are his true opinions or not. In Macbeth, he states, "Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more." Life is playing a role in conforming to categories. It is simpler to agree with a country's accepted idea of nationalism than to disagree and critically examine with the construction of pride towards a country and free oneself of these positions. Downie states that,
roles are kind of dangerous. Anytime you talk about, adopting a role for the stage, you're talking about doing something by rote, learning a line or learning something, and ultimately stage just isn't like that.
The stage in a musical sense is a fantasy responding conceptually to outside influences. Live music can reflect the events of reality, but its objective is to create a utopian vision of the real world, unlike Shakespeare's perception of the theatrical stage, which is to mirror life's positive and negative values. Downie and the rest of the band do not apply culture's labels to themselves, as it restricts their creative process and reduces them from musicians to beings whose only purpose is to spout the man's nationalism, memorized without understanding the deeper implications. Thus, they are Canada's band only to others. Firmly established in Canadian culture as the national poet by the 2002 release of the album In Violet Light, Downie expresses his reluctance of this position in the digital bonus track Problem Bears. He quotes a paraphrased assertion by Voltaire that Shakespeare is a drunken savage with some imagination whose plays please only in London and Canada, to which Voltaire is called sober and green-eyed, most likely by a lyrical depiction of Shakespeare. The insults involving the two writers are funny, like two tough-talking goalies who are really going at it upstairs. In regular gameplay, hockey goalies would be on opposite ends of the rink, not able to engage in a physical fight. They can only tough talk and trade insults, neither significantly affecting the other. A non-essential worker takes on the green-eyed Voltaire in the song. Downie can be positioned as the worker, as the opening lines of the song reference songwriting itself and hunting the problem bears, pursuing the title subject. His presence within the feud between the two writers is also non-essential, as he cannot change its outcome. Ultimately, everything is quiet upstairs. The tough talk between Shakespeare and Voltaire has abated, and the workers' pursuit of Voltaire is unresolved. The annals of history, or the afterlife, upstairs, has deemed Shakespeare and his works as more significant in London, Canada, and elsewhere than Voltaire's. To take on Voltaire would be pointless, and sound just like murder, only adding insult to injury. Indeed, as Downie abandons this train of thought in the next stanza. History and public opinion have more control over how one is viewed than a single individual. They even outweigh the personal conceptions of that same individual. Shakespeare may be an inconsequential drunken savage to Voltaire, but the philosopher only appears jealous or green-eyed, a metaphor coined by Shakespeare, when viewed through the lens of cultural significance. Once a label has been established and has gained credibility through a legacy, it endures. Regardless if Downie does not wish to be viewed as Canada's Shakespeare, he is. Downie uses Shakespeare in his lyrics not from his prescribed identification with the bard, but because he's just there, you know? By being considered the greatest writer of the English language, Shakespeare is recognizable to nearly everyone who speaks it. His presence is more readily accessible than more obscure writers. Shakespeare was inserted into Downie's lyrics before his stature as a massive Canadian icon was established, and would still be even if he had not earned that title. One's cultural repertoire is free to be plumbed in the name of creation, as Downie also utilizes the themes of other writers and theorists like Raymond Carver in Use It Up and John Cage in Tiger the Lion. By using the character from King Lear, the song Cordelia, Downie links the overarching metaphor of the song's chorus, "I'm not Cordelia, I will not be there," to the play. The song's lyrics originate from a more culturally available location and are therefore more understandable than if Downie created his own figure of speech. The idea of a national poet is not flatly perceived in Downie's lyrics or the Tragically hip songwriting. The band is aware of the ramifications of basing a nation's culture on a single visionary artist, and articulates the concepts in 3 pistols. The song opens with the artist Tom Thomson paddling past the speaker and declaring they should both bring on a brand new renaissance, 'cause I think I'm ready. Thomson's Bride of the Northern Wood is later stating as never having any time for the speaker because they didn't protest enough. Operator of the website Hip Museum, Stephen Dame, describes that the paraphrased line from Hamlet echoes its plot of a king returning from the dead to urge the living to avenge his death. From the quotation, it's assumed that Thomson in the opening lines is no longer living. A legend states that his ghost continues to paddle across the lake he drowned in. Thomson died before his associated art collective, the Group of Seven, was founded. Like Thomson, they wished to create a wholly new vision of art, one that is identifiably Canadian, depicting the country's landscape as home. Each member functioned as disciples of the stylistic missionary that is Tom Thomson, and attempted to do justice to his legacy, succeeding to the point that the group's paintings of Canada have become quintessential images, populating almost every museum and home in some capacity across the country. In the late 18th century, a similar phenomenon was occurring in England. A burgeoning revival of Shakespeare's popularity led to John and Josiah Boydell's Shakespeare Gallery. They aspired to create an English school of painting comparable to those in other nations, and chose one of the most recognizably English figures, Shakespeare, as the genesis to revitalize the nation's art. It failed in establishing a new English vision of art, but it did contribute to the late 18th century's coronation of Shakespeare as their definitive national poet. The Tragically hip are viewed as reinvigorating the poetically dead country of Canada. At the outset of the band's career, writing about Canada as a Canadian was a faux pas, and not treated as seriously as writing about America as an American, or even writing about America as a Canadian. The Canadian music scene perceived the band as utilizing the country as a lyrical subject with such artfulness that others now knew it would not be contrived to do the same. The Group of Seven, Shakespeare's historical popularity, and the Tragically hip each display a conceptual avenging of the death of a king, or a grand object unplumbed until that time in art, and established a brand new renaissance, enlivening previously relegated cultural material. These 3 avenged kings have contributed significantly to society, but to view them simply as kings is to divorce them from context. Tom Thomson's paintings would not be viewed as visionary without his friendships and the rest of the Group of Seven to promote him. Shakespeare would arguably be relatively obscure in the present day if his colleagues did not compile his plays into the first folio. To elevate Gord Downie above his bandmates is to erase the interconnectedness of the Tragically hip songwriting. Downie may be the only member writing lyrics, but he often draws his poetry from the phrases and conversations around him, and contributes to instrumentals. To laud a single person over others is to reduce them to a single role of visionary. In 3 Pistols, Tom Thomson is a ghost paddling a single lake for eternity, stating, "Let's bring on the brand new renaissance for eternity," with no other aspects of his true personality. In Shakespeare's The Tempest, in its moments of self-referentiality to theater, elaborates Downie's perspective of a visionary status. These are actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air, and like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. To be human is to have fluidity and personality. The stagnant and repetitious roles in theater lack such dimensionality. As established in Macbeth, to view life outside the theater, similar to theater, is to create a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury. And to perceive the legacy of a person similarly results in the same. The stage may view life as singular, where each person only conforms to archetypes, but in reality, those roles are melted into thin air, and the dreams each actor has outside the stage can ensure it does not become like theater. Dreams where you don't let the nation get in your way, as Downie says in Fireworks, and become dominated by nationalism or any other ideology, by the self or from others' conceptions, are the foundations of humanity. To focus too intently on them is to eliminate personhood and become another role. While the absence of personal writings by William Shakespeare suggests we may never know his individual opinions on nationalism or English politics, the artistry of his creative works ensures his poetry can be applied to these subjects. The ambiguity of poetry also means it can be used to promote a nationalistic or patriotic agenda counter to the author's wishes, as is the circumstance with Downie and the Tragically Hip. Downie receives the label of his country's national poet from his surrounding culture, as does Shakespeare, but both artists are unable to have others view themselves and their works in the manner they wish due to their established legacies. To be viewed by culture as only serving one function, be it a nationalist writer or otherwise, is to no longer be creative, and to lose one's humanity.